Lucas sat in his car in front of his childhood home, the memories flooding back like a torrent. The last time he had been here, the constant fear of spiders had driven him away. "They know me there," he had always said, a half-joking mantra that masked a deep and irrational terror. Little Harvest had been a quaint town, but its 8-legged inhabitants had turned it into a nightmare for Lucas. 12 years of distance had done little to quell his unease, but the news of his mother's passing had brought him back. Arrangements had already been taken care of by his older sister, Franny. There was to be a visitation that night at the funeral home, with the actual funeral being held at their home church the next day at 2. He had avoided returning for as long as he could, believing that the spiders of Little Harvest would never truly let him go. Now, as he stepped out of his car, he felt the familiar sensation of being watched, unseen eyes scrutinizing his every move. The memory of 1,000 spider bites haunted him, and his skin prickled in response. Franny emerged from the house. Her eyes held a mix of relief and sorrow as she rushed to embrace him. "Lucas, you're finally here," she whispered. He managed a tight smile, returning her hug awkwardly. "Yeah, Franny, I'm here." As the day passed, Lucas's tension was obvious. They talked about the arrangements Franny had made, and about their mother's life and legacy. But beneath it all was the unspoken knowledge that Lucas's fear still held him in its grip. That night, after the visitation, the siblings returned to their childhood home. But as darkness settled over the house, Lucas decided he couldn't spend the night there, not surrounded by the walls that had once felt like a prison. "I'm going to find a motel," he told Franny, who looked at him with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "You're really not going to stay here?" she asked, her brow furrowing. Lucas shook his head, his gaze steady. "No, I can't. I need to be somewhere else tonight." Franny's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but she finally nodded. "Okay, if that's what you need." Lucas left the house, his heart pounding as the memories of his childhood fears came rushing back. He couldn't shake the feeling that the spiders were watching, lurking in the shadows, waiting for him to let his guard down. At the motel, he sat on the edge of the bed, his mind a whirlwind of dread. The events of the past began to blur with the present, and he wondered if his paranoia had finally driven him to the edge of madness. As he lay down to sleep, he felt a sudden tingling on his skin, a sensation he knew all too well. He jumped up, his heart racing, and turned on the lights. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of his anxiety. And then he saw it. A spider lurking in the corner. A stowaway from the house, no doubt. A cold sweat broke out on his brow as he grabbed a shoe and smashed the creature, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He knew it was just one spider, just a single arachnid, but the terror it invoked was all-consuming. Hours passed as Lucas remained on high alert, his mind spiraling into darkness. When dawn finally broke, he knew he had to prepare for the funeral. The service was somber, a mix of tears and memories shared among family and friends. It was hot that day, but as Lucas stood by his mother's grave, he felt a familiar cold chill, the sensation of being watched intensifying. Franny leaned in close, her voice a gentle whisper. "You're not alone, Lucas. We're all here for you." He nodded, grateful for her support even if he couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister lurked nearby. Upon leaving the church, Lucas and Franny returned to their childhood home. The afternoon sun cast shadows across the walls, and a sense of unease settled over Lucas. As he and Franny talked in the kitchen, he heard a faint rustling, a sound like whispers carried by the wind. Franny noticed his discomfort. "What's wrong, Lucas?" "They're here, Franny," he said, his voice trembling. "I can feel them. The spiders, they're still here." Franny looked at him with concern, but before she could reply, a sudden movement caught her eye. A shadow danced across the wall, and then another. Lucas followed her gaze, his heart sinking as he realized what was happening. The walls seemed to come alive, a crawling mass of spiders emerging from every corner, every crevice. Lucas's fear had become a reality, his paranoia validated as the creatures he had dreaded for years surrounded him. Franny grabbed his arm, her voice a mixture of urgency and concern. "We need to get out of here, Lucas." Together they fled the kitchen, running into the living room, the sound of scuttling legs echoing behind them. The air was thick with the feeling of countless eyes upon them, and Lucas knew that his fears had been justified all along. An undulating curtain of the voracious creatures was already draped over the front door, blocking their exit. Knowing what must be done, Lucas calmly reached for a decorative oil lamp sitting on a nearby end table. He swatted away 3 spiders that crawled onto his hand, and then he paused, thinking of his mother. And of Franny. That's when he saw that Franny had already flipped open her lighter and was prepared to throw it. "Do it, Lucas," her voice cracked. He threw the lamp directly against the front door, glass shattering and oil splashing across its surface. A second later, Franny threw the lighter. Flames shot across the walls and the floor, disintegrating the spiders it made contact with. Lucas and Franny ran for the door in that instant, just before a sea of spiders on the floor reached them. Lucas jerked open the door and they ran through, shielding their faces from flames and spiders. As they reached the safety of the outdoors, the sunny tranquility offered a stark contrast to the nightmarish ordeal they had just faced. They brushed a small few spiders from each other's clothes and hair, stomping them as they hit the ground. A few hundred spiders could be seen crawling out of tiny openings in the outside of the house, but most remained confined within its walls, a part of Lucas's past that he could finally leave behind. Within minutes, fire had engulfed the entire house and it was beginning to collapse. They waited that long before calling the fire department. In the aftermath, Lucas sought therapy, determined to confront his fears head-on. Over time, he learned to manage his phobia, to recognize that the spiders of his past were not the monsters he had imagined them to be. Sure, it wasn't your run-of-the-mill nest, but they were still just spiders. Without the numbers, they weren't so bad. And with Franny's unwavering support, he faced his demons and emerged stronger. The house in Little Harvest remained a haunting memory, a place he had once feared would forever imprison him. But Lucas had learned that sometimes confronting the darkness was the only way to find the light. As he walked away from the town that had once held him captive, he knew that he was finally free. Lucas and Franny never knew about the insurance adjusters who came to inspect the property. Apparently there had once been a house here, but now all that remained was a sinkhole, at least 30 feet wide, so deep they couldn't see the bottom. But there were sounds. A symphony of tiny, skittering footsteps like the rustling of autumn leaves carried on a gentle breeze. A collective murmur of countless legs brushing against surfaces, creating a faint yet incessant whispering chorus punctuated by occasional clicks and taps on the earth. The 2 men above weren't sure what was waiting below. But what waited below knew them.